My first 10mm hand loads. So I'm going to do some XTP hand loads, and the bullets and the cases were sent over by one of my Patreon supporters, Hillbilly Scholar. He also sent over another box of bullets and a die set, a 4 die set for 10mm, so I could start hand loading 10mm. It's not something I've done before yet. I have hand loaded 45 ACP in the past, but it's been a really long time. So this should be an interesting test here. So I did these exactly by the book with accurate number 9 powder. You know, that shows Winchester large pistol primers. I got those 180 grain XTPs, and I loaded 13.5 grains of our accurate number 9, and I'm using a 180 grain XTP, and we are set to 1.25 inches exactly, and that has a listed pressure of 34,100 psi and a listed velocity from a 5-inch barrel of 1,242 feet per second. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to do my main test with my Smith & Wesson Model 610 here, and Hillbilly Scholar has also gotten into the 610 game. He's got his own version. I believe it's the mountain gun version. So I'm really interested to see what we'll get out of a revolver. So what I did is I also brought out my 5.3-inch Glock 41 and 45 ACP, and it is converted over to 10mm. So I got a 5.3-inch 10mm Lone Wolf 10mm conversion barrel, and I got a 20-pound spraying 10mm magazine. I could never get this thing to run right, but I thought it would be interesting to use it for velocity and to use it for a ballistic gel test, because, you know, with this barrel we have a 1 in 16-inch twist. Typical Smith & Wesson revolvers are 1 in 18 and 3/4-inch twist. So there's a little bit of a difference in twist there, and we can also see if we have a lot of velocity loss due to the cylinder gap. So if you might be thinking, well, that's only a 4-inch revolver and that's a 5.3-inch semi-auto, I actually have one of these barrels here that go to that Glock 41. And if we line up from the back of that chamber there, you can see it's almost exactly the same length with a 5.3-inch semi-auto versus this 4-inch revolver barrel with this particular cylinder. So that should give us a really good idea about cylinder gap gas loss with these particular rounds. So I'm going to go through the chronograph, see what kind of velocity and accuracy I get at the same time. Then I'm going to do my 10% clear ballistic gel test. So I'm going to go into plain 10% clear ballistics to see what the best potential of those cartridges are. They'll denim in the way that could potentially clog a hollow point or anything like that, and we'll see how they do. And then I'll move on to doing more of a real world simulation where I'm going to have 4 layers of sweatshirt on this first 3-inch piece that represents hitting a pectoral muscle, followed by a 1/4-inch medium density fiberboard that represents hitting ribs or sternum, 16 more inches of clear ballistics, and another 1/4-inch MDF at the back to represent hitting back ribs. Clear ballistics is roughly a half representation of the density of flesh, so 3 inches and 16 inches, and this gel is more like 1.5 inches and 8 inches in actual living flesh. So if we're talking, you know, 19 inches here, that's more like 9.5 inches and an actual living target. So if we go beyond the back rib simulation by more than 3 inches, that could indicate it might pass through an average size attacker. But we'll do a plain clear ballistic shot, then a real world simulation shot with both of those guns, and then I will shoot at the steel target to see what kind of practical accuracy and shootability I can get with these. So let's get started with this test. All right, first up, we'll run these hand loads through the 5.3-inch Glock 41 conversion. The listed velocity through a 5-inch barrel they have on the load data site is 1242 feet per second out of a 5-inch barrel. So we'll see how close we get to 1242 out of this 5.3-inch barrel. This thing will probably malfunction. It always has. So I'm just using it for science here. This is not going to be the one I'm going to be shooting at the target with. But let's see what we get with these hand loads. See how close we get to 1242 feet per second. 1222. 1227. 1218. And I getting a typical weird malfunction I got going on there. It happens typically with this particular pistol. And the magazines do kind of get loose and jiggle out, so I do got some thick tape on there just to keep that from happening. But I'll try to get a couple more reads. 1227, same thing. I'll leave it at that just because, you know, I don't want to deal with this anymore. So that's a pretty tight spread of velocity there. Now the big concern here is with loads like this, what are they going to do? Or am I going to get bullet creep out? It's been a long time since I've done taper crimps. And I think I got them right, but I did color my last bullet there, the entire bullet, in black marker specifically so that I'll notice right away if I get any bullet creep out. I can take that out and take a look at it, and if I see any copper color there, that could indicate that I'm having a problem. So lower 1200s, 1225-ish out of the semi-auto. Let's see what we get out of the revolver here. 1198, 1196. I'm going to pull this out already and take a look after just a couple rounds. No bullet creep out. I'm not pulling it out all the way because it's hard to reinsert this, but none so far. 1164. I pulled that one so I didn't get a read. 1139, so not so tight a velocity there. And not really seeing any bullet creep out because I don't see any copper there in that last one. So the consistency of velocity in this is less, and that's probably just, you know, each individual chamber is different in revolvers. So it's hard sometimes to get tight velocities in revolvers. So one more round here. 1181. So we had one that was just kind of inconsistently low. The rest of them there probably average 35, 40 feet per second less, which is pretty typical. That puts it right around that 5% velocity loss that you see out of revolvers versus semi-autos with similar amount of barrel travel. So yeah, pretty average, pretty standard velocity loss. So now there's a little bit different twist rate in these, you know, 1 and 18 3/4 versus 1 and 16 inch. Will that make a big difference? I've had people tell me that makes a huge difference in the ballistics gel, but we'll see if there's a difference. So let's have our ballistics gel with these. All right, first up we'll do our plain clear ballistic shot, as I like to call our best potential shot, because it's our best potential to get good hollow point expansion because there's no fabric to clog the hollow point. Our best potential to get really deep penetration because there's no rib simulation to slow down that potential for penetration. So let's see what we get through our semi-automatic with that round. All right, well. All right, let's see if there's a huge difference if we hit it from our revolver. Let's go take a look. All right, so the revolver one, it curved down a little bit, which is interesting. Both of those hit pretty darn hard, and I will say this whole thing moved a 1/2 inch, which is not typical to move this, because if you add up the weight of everything here, we were talking about, I'm gonna say like 36, 37 pounds. So yeah, it moved everything. It's pretty impressive. Actually knocked it down, kind of. And our first 3 inches, our energy dump with our semi-auto on the bottom, revolver on top. Not a huge difference, a little bit different looking, but not really a huge difference. The pattern going into the main block is just as wide with both. It's just that the angle of the one from the revolver is kind of flat, going this angle down like this, so it doesn't look as wide as where the one from the semi-auto is this way, so you see it really well. So not a big surprise here with what we're seeing going on here, because, you know, we went just a little bit deeper with the revolver, which would indicate just a tad less velocity, but we're really in the velocity range with both of these that there's not going to be a huge difference. Now, we did see bullet rollback from the semi-auto, and generally I only see that if at some point that bullet was expanded to over 65 hundredths of an inch. I've noticed that's the particular number. So even if the bullet is less big around than that, at some point it was at least that big, and it may have shrunk down just from the whole, you know, moving through the gel thing going on. So what we got with our semi-auto here, so we're right at about, I'll give it 14 3/4 inches of penetration, a really good expansion. The one from our Revolver here, we got about, I'll give it 16 inches. So a little bit more with the Revolver, which would indicate probably just a tad less expansion overall. It may have ended up bigger, but yeah, at one point, the one from the semi-auto was probably bigger and it peeled back, if it's not actually bigger. So let's see what we get with our real world simulation and see if the semi-auto makes a big difference over the Revolver with that. All right, our real world simulation, 4 layers of sweatshirt material. It's kind of what I'm wearing now. Followed by 3 inches of clear ballistics that represents hitting a pectoral muscle, followed by a 1/4 inch medium density fiberboard that represents hitting ribs or sternum. 16 more inches of clear ballistics, and then another 1/4 inch MDF at the back to represent hitting back ribs. That's kind of our real world simulation. So let's see what we get with the 10mm from our 5.3 inch semi-auto here. Let me set that all back up and we'll hit it with the Revolver. All right, our real world simulation from a Revolver here. See how this does. Let's go take a look. All right, so there was enough difference in the velocity to make a difference, which is interesting. We'll take a look at a rib simulation here. Both of them, though, had a huge amount of expansion before hitting this. I can't really say that one's significantly bigger. It looks like probably the semi-auto is just a tad bigger than the one from our Revolver, and that's a good hallmark of an XTP, which is a pretty good thing. You know, XTPs are not the best bullets when you're talking like 9mm and stuff like that, but when you get some legit power, they're actually pretty good defensive bullets. But yeah, there's a big difference there in what we're seeing, because basically what I'm seeing here is the one from the Revolver stopped against that rib simulation. There it is. Huge dent in there. So that's going to give you some maximum penetration. Here's our bullet. That's going to give you some maximum penetration there. And I would say that would not pass through an attacker, but it's going a little bit deeper. So yeah, it's kind of hard to say here, because you know, the one from the semi-auto went a little bit straighter. The one from the Revolver, I mean, the one from the semi-auto went a little bit curved down just a little bit, and a little bit straighter from the Revolver. Damage wise, I'm going to say pretty much identical here. But you know, for whatever reason, that rifling or that velocity loss or whatever it is making the one from the Revolver go significantly deeper. Now, sure, we might see a different thing if I shoot it again. This could be one of those low velocity ones, but I like to just shoot it once. You know, that's an overview of what we're probably going to see, and just kind of call it there. But the one from our semi-auto, it looks like the expansion might even be smaller than the one we pulled out from the Revolver. And that could just be from peeling back a little bit. And sometimes we see if we hit a little bit more power going into the gel, sometimes it will, it won't go as deep for some reason, even if it's a smaller diameter, because it's just that back force of resistance can sometimes really change things. But what we got with the semi-auto here is we got about 15.5 inches of penetration, which is really good, a ton of damage. So I was not expecting that. I thought these were going to go halfway through block too. Now with the one from Revolver, we stopped right there at 19 inches at our back rib simulation. So technically the one from the Revolver is a little bit over penetration, but not by enough for me to really consider that too much. So, you know, the hand loads, I'm going to say that overall these hand loads are an extremely good success, because single digit extreme spreads with the semi-auto. And, you know, we saw that it wasn't so good from the revolver, and that could have something to do with each particular revolver chamber. So I'm going to say overall these are pretty good hand loads, but, you know, the velocity wise they're doing a little bit better through the semi-auto. But I just so happen I don't have a very good semi-auto in 10mm, so I'm going to be running the accuracy test from just the revolver, but it still should be fun anyway. So let's pull these out of the block, take a close-up look at them, then I'll shoot our steel and see what kind of practical accuracy and shootability I can get with these. All right, so here's a close-up look at these bullets going through plain gel. Here's the one from our semi-automatic pistol and the one from our revolver here. So with the one from their semi-automatic pistol, we have really good expansion. There was definitely a lot more fragmentation pieces in that channel. So this one hit going a little bit faster. It was enough to fragment it pretty badly at, you know, the average velocity that these are moving at. With the ones from our revolver, there was actually almost none. There was like a couple pieces of fragmentation. So just bringing that velocity average down a little bit made a big difference in how big that bullet is left over. Now going through our rib simulation, I actually lost that first bullet. I could not find it. So off camera, I did fire another one from the revolver through our rib simulation. That shot actually got about 17.5 inches instead of 19 inches. It's pretty similar overall. You know, our average is right there around 18 inches, but it looked about the same as the first one. So yeah, this is the second shot off camera. So the one from our semi-auto through our rib simulation, we have pretty good expansion compared to from our Glock with the plain gel. You know, it lowered that expansion threshold just enough that we didn't see a whole lot of fragmentation. So it actually performs a little bit better through fabric and rib simulation, which I like to see. That's more important than looking perfect in plain gel. Now, our revolver through our MDF, again, it looks really, really good. A smaller size than through plain gel with our revolver, but very, very consistent overall. So I'm going to say when we actually have a real world simulation going on, we got ribs in there and fabric or fur or whatever, very consistent overall with these particular loads. So that's a close-up look at those bullets. All right, 14 yards from the target, so I'm just going to see what kind of practical shootability I can get with these. So I'm just going to get a front sight picture and pop these off as fast as I think I can hit the target. So let's see if we get here. 14 yards. All right, I'm not great with that from this distance. This revolver, I've just never been good with the trigger pull on it. It's a little bit different than my revolver chambered revolvers, revolver cartridge chambered revolvers. I don't know why, but not bad overall and pretty easy to control out of this revolver. So let me back it up a little bit. All right, I lied. I came back to 75 yards, which is not a little bit. And I also did bring my semi-auto, even though it has issues with malfunctions, because I do kind of want to see how this stuff would fire. So 75 yards. I'm just going to feed these things in manually one at a time and just kind of see how they shoot from 75 yards. So I'm just going to aim center mass and shoot kind of slow and see how these things do. So let's see how they do from our Glock 41 conversion. I pulled that one for sure. That's hard for me to shoot. I'm pulling it with that because in this gun there is quite a bit of recoil, so it's not super easy to focus on what I'm shooting because I'm tensing up just a little bit. And I'm not just saying that because now I have a heavy revolver. I'm saying that because that's legitimately how it was for me. So because the trigger on this isn't great in double action, at least I'm not good with it, I'll do single action, just kind of see where they hit from the single action. And center mass. Pull that last one. if you can't see the value in this at this point, wow, because there's a huge value in shooting something like this out of a revolver like that, because it's so much easier to shoot. You know, 10 millimeter out of a revolver like this, I would say, is kind of like shooting 45 auto standard pressure out of this Glock. Shooting 10 millimeter out of this Glock is more like, it's really not like anything else. It's not quite like a Magnum. It's kind of like if there was a 45 Super round in that, kind of that type of feel. Maybe kind of like a low-end 44 Magnum. It just feels weird, as where this feels just like a normal round. So I'll keep going. So they are trending just a little bit low. A little bit low. And one thing I've noticed about the Starline brass here, they don't want to hold on these moon clips very well. Some brass I have no problem with, but lately, not just this brass, but brass I've had from other companies that say Starline on them, they barely hold into these moon clips. But keep going, but I'm going to aim a little bit higher because they are trending a little bit low. Wow, that one I pulled really far somehow. So overall, I'm going to say it's easier for me to make hits with the Revolver. That's just me, and I am shooting single action. It's got this really nice target hammer here, so honestly, if I had to hunt with one of these, I would definitely use this. This makes more precise shots. It's just easier to shoot overall. I really like this Revolver. I know a lot of people complain about the semi-auto. Why not just get a semi-auto? Well, not easy for everybody to afford everything at all times. I don't get new guns for the channel every month for a reason. I only get maybe 2 or 3 a year. Oftentimes they are sub $500 handguns. Yeah, it's not easy to keep doing these tests because they are expensive, and also pick up a new firearm. So this was like, this was not an easy thing for me to acquire here. So getting into 10 millimeter and thinking, well, I need to get like a semi-auto that's going to cost nearly as much and maybe it'll run. It was just a very attractive thing for me to look at the Revolver and be like, well, it's not a maybe with that, it's going to run. Enough with that. So looking at these hand loads, and again, thank you to Hillbilly Scholar for sending these. This is fun, and we're going to do some 200 grain ones as well. I may or may not spice up the charge with these particular loads also, because he says that some of the older data showed a little bit higher charges than what I'm using, and that would be some pretty good loads overall. But I would say overall these are pretty good. They're a little bit better than your typical run-of-the-mill ammo. Like, I think we were in the mid, upper 500, lower 600 foot-pounds, something like that, which is actually a lot better than most target ammo. Most target ammo and most ammo you get in a box doesn't even hit 500 foot-pounds. So we're definitely more powerful with these, just basic hand loads, than what you are with most factory ammo. And overall, once you get the supplies to reload, it's pretty cheap to reload it. So it's a win-win overall with rounds like this. So I would say they're pretty good. And again, thank you to Hillbilly Scholar. So that's what you get today. So as always, comment, share, and like, and thanks for watching.